The cub was drowning, the bear was roaring, and she, Harper Lane, ecologist, scientist, and self-proclaimed realist, was already waist-deep in the glacial waters before she even realized she'd dropped the radio from her hand. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Something ancient had moved in her bones, something older than science and wilder than fear. In that moment, she was not a researcher, she was simply human, and that was enough. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Early spring in Montana had always carried with it a sense of fragile beauty, a delicate equilibrium between thaw and flood. But this year, something had broken. The snowmelt came early, pouring off the mountains like white thunder, turning the glacier river into a wild, frothing serpent that cut violently through the parkland. The scent of pine was thick in the air, mixed with the sharp bite of cold water, and the skies above the town of West Glacier were the color of steel wool, heavy with unspoken warnings. At the edge of this teetering wilderness, two figures stood on the upper ridge overlooking the falls. Caleb Bryant, a man shaped by decades in the woods, had his eyes narrowed against the wind. He was 58, with deep-set lines around his eyes that only softened when he spoke of animals. A lifetime of working in forest services had carved his body into lean endurance. Tall, wiry, weather-worn, Caleb rarely spoke unless necessary, and when he did, his voice carried the quiet gravity of someone who'd outlived more things than he cared to count. The death of his only son in a hiking accident here, 13 years ago, had locked something away inside him, a door he didn't plan to open again. Beside him was Harper Lane, young and full of urgency at 26. She stood a little below his shoulder, with sun-freckled skin and dark red hair that refused to stay pinned beneath her hood. Her build was compact but strong, the kind of strength forged in climbing ropes and carrying field gear across frozen valleys. Harper was a graduate student from Oregon State, working on her thesis about predator adaptation in warming climates. She had an idealist's passion and a scientist's precision, though she often struggled with authority, especially when that authority clashed with what she believed nature needed. Caleb had called her a wildfire in hiking boots once, and it had stuck. They had spent the morning setting up trail cams to monitor elk migration, hiking in silence through the mud and patches of brittle snow. When the sound came, deep, ragged, primal. It wasn't thunder. The roar rolled out from the thickets ahead, bouncing off the cliffside, and Harper froze. Her instinct said mountain lion, or worse, grizzly. That's not a threat call, Caleb muttered, already pushing through the undergrowth. That's panic. They scrambled down the path carved out by centuries of deer and rainfall, boots slipping on damp earth. As they reached the lower ledge overlooking the glacier falls, the scene unfolded before them like something torn out of myth. A grizzly bear, massive, scarred, and slick with river spray, was running back and forth along the jagged rock ledge, pausing now and then to bellow into the torrent below. His coat was dark brown, streaked with silver, his breath visible in the frigid air. There was desperation in every step, not aggression. Caleb could feel it. And there, in the boiling chaos of the whitewater below, was a cub barely the size of a large dog. The young bear was caught in the undertow, flailing against the current that threatened to drag it beneath. Its high-pitched yelps were drowned by the roar of the falls, but the father, Boone, as Caleb would later name him, heard them all, every shout, every cry. He had no way to reach his child, and it was destroying him, Harper gasped and took a step back. "We can't be here if that bear sees us." "Caleb, he could charge." Caleb didn't move. "Look at him." Boone didn't even glance in their direction. His whole body was focused downward, trembling with fear, not rage. His claws scraped against the stone as he lunged toward the edge, then stopped again, as if afraid that one wrong move would cost his cub its life. "That's not a threat," Caleb said. "That's a father." Harper's breath caught. Her training told her to retreat, but her heart, suddenly raw and full, told her otherwise. "What do we do?" Caleb looked at the cub again, its tiny paws slipping on a submerged rock, struggling to stay above the surface. "We think," he said grimly, "and we think fast." The water was rising, and the cub was losing the fight. The wind picked up over the icy plains of Glacier National Park, cutting low and fast through the pine trees like a whisper laced with urgency. The sun remained hidden behind dense gray clouds, casting a cold, flat light over the whitewater surge below, from their elevated position above the river. The world had narrowed to one singular focus: the small grizzly cub struggling against the roar of spring meltwater, its tiny form barely visible between the waves. Caleb Bryant's hands gripped the handlebars of the old ATV with the certainty of a man who had survived too many things by staying calm. 58 years of watching the forest rise, fall, and rise again had taught him that sometimes the most heroic thing you could do was create space for breath, for instinct, for survival. Downhill, a herd of elk had begun to gather, curious and confused by the scent of wet bear and frightened humans. If they surged toward the river in panic, it would be chaos. Worse, it would cost precious seconds. Caleb swung the ATV in a wide arc and gunned the engine, its low rumble rising into a sharp growl. Mud kicked up from under the tires, spattering his boots and the thick bark of surrounding trees. He veered directly into the elk's path, forcing them to scatter to higher ground. Away from the riverbank, the path to the water was now clear. Up the ridge, Harper Lane didn't wait for confirmation. Her heart pounded like the river below, but her hands moved with the clean purpose of someone who knew fear only slowed you down. She pulled the rescue rope from her side pack and secured it around her waist, looping the end tightly around the base of a thick pine trunk. Her gloves were soaked, her fingers trembling from more than just cold. She raised her walkie and spoke into it quickly, voice tight with adrenaline. "This is Lane. Emergency rescue in progress. One cub in water. Human intervention necessary. Requesting backup at Glacier Falls. West Ridge. Over." A burst of static. Then a voice responded. "Copy that. Rescue en route. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Harper looked down at the cub and knew it didn't have that long. Below, Boone, the grizzly father, had not moved an inch from his perch along the rocks. His massive body was tense, weight shifting only slightly as his eyes tracked every desperate movement of the cub. The muscles in his shoulders flexed each time the cub slipped beneath the surface, and each time it emerged. Boone let out a low, guttural rumble that echoed off the granite walls like distant thunder. He did not attempt to follow. Perhaps he knew he couldn't. Harper took one breath. 2. Then she stepped over the edge. The water was beyond cold. It was glacial, biting into her legs with a force that felt like being struck. She moved slowly, bracing against the pull of the current with each careful step. The rope held, but each tug felt more fragile than the last. The rocks were slick underfoot, and every shift of water threatened to knock her off balance. Still, she moved forward. The cub's head was barely above water now, its eyes wide with terror and its paws flailing in circles that grew smaller by the second. Harper shouted, though she knew her words were lost to the sound of the falls. She kept moving, chest deep now, then neck deep. One wave struck her face and forced her backward, but she held on to the rope and fought on. Then, just ahead, the cub saw her. It turned slightly. Or maybe it drifted unintentionally, but either way, it was now facing her. Harper extended one arm, voice hoarse from cold and shouting, urging it on. Boone released a deep roar from the rocks behind them, not violent, not warning. It was a command, a call. The cub responded. It paddled clumsily toward her, its small limbs jerking without rhythm. Harper reached, missed, adjusted, and then caught it. A clump of fur and shaking limbs landed in her arms, and the rope went taut as the weight shifted from the ridge. Caleb appeared, boots sliding down the last few feet of slope. Without a word, he grabbed the rope and began pulling, inch by inch. Harper and the cub moved backward, the river reluctantly releasing them with a final heave. Harper collapsed onto the mud-soaked riverbank, cradling the soaked, shivering cub to her chest. Her lungs burned, her skin numb, but the cub breathed. And that was all that mattered. Boone stepped forward from the ledge, still watching, but he did not come closer. And for now, that was enough. The air in Glacier National Park settled into a rare stillness as the last echoes of rushing water faded behind them. The river, which only minutes ago had threatened to steal a life, now pulsed quietly under a slate-gray sky. Clouds thinned just enough for the late afternoon sun to push through in streaks, painting gold over pine needles and water-slicked rocks. Steam rose from Harper's soaked jacket as she crouched on the riverbank. Her arms still wrapped protectively around the shivering cub, whose heart beat in wild, rapid rhythm against hers. Boone stood no more than 10 feet away. His massive chest rose and fell in slow, controlled breaths. His fur was damp from snowmelt spray, giving the deep brown strands a silvery sheen in the light. He was older than Harper had first thought. Gray dusted his muzzle and beneath his dark eyes. Thick scars ran from some long-past battle, perhaps with other males or nature itself, but his eyes, wide and alive, betrayed none of the fury often attributed to his kind. Instead, they held something else, recognition, and something eerily close to reverence. Harper slowly lowered the cub to the ground and stepped back, not out of fear, but out of instinctive respect. The cub wobbled on all fours, paws slipping briefly in the mud before regaining balance. Boone moved then, deliberately, not aggressively, taking 2 heavy steps toward his child. Then, to Harper's astonishment, he bowed his head, not in submission, but in something gentler. He nudged the cub softly, then licked its tiny face with a slow, deliberate motion. The cub squeaked once and curled its body against Boone's massive foreleg. Harper could feel her heart crack open at the sight. Caleb had come up behind her, quietly, his breath visible in short clouds. I've seen bears kill over territory. I've seen them drag elk through snow. But this... He paused, voice heavy. This is gratitude. Harper said nothing. Words would have ruined it. They stood in silence for a long minute, the only sound the shifting of trees in the breeze and the rustling of Boone's enormous paws as he repositioned himself to shield the cub from the wind. He did not look at them again, nor did he show fear. He simply existed, wild, powerful, and for the first time in Harper's life, entirely understandable. Later that evening, the wind picked up again. Colder now. A spring front was moving in from the north. the kind that twisted the pine branches and rattled loose bark from tree trunks. At the ranger outpost cabin nestled in the edge of the forest, Harper warmed her hands near the fireplace, still wrapped in borrowed flannel from the gear locker. Her hair was still damp despite the towel wrapped around it. Caleb stood at the window, arms crossed, looking out into the dusk like a soldier standing watch. "I thought bears were just instinct," Harper finally said, her voice lower than usual, "that everything they did could be predicted or mapped." "Instinct doesn't bow its head," Caleb said quietly. "It wasn't just survival today, that was understanding." The fire cracked softly behind them. A log shifted, releasing a gust of sparks. "I'm starting to think we understand less than we think," she added. Caleb turned. "You've got heart." "Harper, that's rare in science these days." She almost smiled. "And you've got science in your heart. That's rare in forest rangers." His expression didn't change, but something softened. He walked over, poured 2 mugs of black coffee, and handed her one. They sat at the old pine table as the wind howled outside, as if the park itself were clearing its throat. "There's something I didn't say earlier," Caleb began. "Something we need to talk about." Harper leaned forward. "I've seen 3 spring melts like this in my lifetime. Never this early, never this intense," he said. "Snow's gone before the soil even knows it was winter. Water doesn't seep, it runs wild. You saw it today. That cub wasn't the first to get caught." Harper nodded slowly. "But it was the first we noticed, exactly." Caleb pulled a folded map from his jacket pocket and spread it on the table. Red dots marked nesting sites, known dens, and migration points. A thin blue line represented the river system, now swollen beyond recognition. "If this keeps happening," he continued, "it's not just the bears, elk calves, fox litters, even ground-dwelling birds, they'll all be caught off guard. This early thaw isn't natural, it's a warning outside." The wind surged again, and somewhere deep in the trees, a branch snapped. Harper stared at the map, at the patterns. "Then we start listening. By morning." The snowfall from the north had melted into a dense mist that hung low across the pines like a veil. The ground in Glacier National Park was soaked, the earth swollen from the thaw, and the air was dense with that metallic scent of waterlogged soil. At the ranger observation post, an old timber-framed building weathered by 3 decades of storms, Harper Lane unrolled topographic maps across the work table. A mug of untouched coffee steamed beside her hand. Forgotten. Harper had barely slept. The memory of Boone bowing his head still pulsed at the front of her mind. But it was no longer just wonder that gripped her. It was urgency. Her fingers traced the thin blue lines of streams and tributaries, the way veins map a body. The rivers were changing course, fast. Wildlife migration patterns had already shifted, but the forest hadn't caught up. Across the table, Caleb Bryant was watching her in silence. He had a notepad open, half covered in precise, square handwriting. He'd been keeping records by hand for decades. He didn't trust digital systems much. Caleb was still in his dark green ranger jacket, a patched sleeve covering the scar left by an old bear trap incident. That had been years ago, but the injury had altered how he walked, a slow, thoughtful gait, like a man measuring each step. It had also made him wary of hurrying, of missing things. Now, as he leaned forward, tapping the map with a calloused finger, his voice came low and certain. "If the river overflows into this lower marsh, it'll drown 3 known fox dens and a fawn nursery." Harper nodded, brushing a lock of hair out of her eyes. "And here," she said, pointing to a curve where the current cut into a steep ravine. If we can rig a reflective panel or high-frequency acoustic emitter near this bend, we might deter animals before they reach danger zones. Bears, elk, even smaller predators respond to sensory changes. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting scaring them off with lights and sound. Not scare, Harper corrected. Warn. Nature doesn't do sirens. Caleb. But it understands patterns. There was a pause before he nodded. We'd need someone who knows wildlife tech, as if summoned by the mention. The front door creaked open, and a tall, lanky man stepped inside, holding a pair of heavy-duty sensor beacons and looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Speak of the devil, Caleb muttered with something close to a smile. The newcomer was Micah Grady, a field engineer from the Regional Wildlife Research Unit, mid-30s, with a mop of curly black hair tucked beneath a faded Denver Broncos beanie. His face was thin but sharp-featured, with a permanent squint from years of working in sunlight and snow glare. Micah was known in the park network for 2 things: building custom tech on a shoestring budget and surviving a solo winter in the backcountry after a research helicopter left him behind. Since then, he hadn't talked much in groups, but one-on-one. He was brilliant. Got your message, Micah said simply, placing the beacons on the table. You want prototype wildlife deterrence? Yeah, Harper gestured to the map. We need early warning triggers before animals get too close to flooded banks. This stretch especially, Boone's territory, and others we haven't seen yet. Micah nodded, already scanning the contours. We can wire in motion-activated ultrasound here. Bears won't like it, but it won't hurt them. Reflective panels here and here, maybe even a dummy predator silhouette, something subtle, but primal, as the 3 of them discussed. A shadow passed across the nearest window. Caleb stiffened. Harper turned. Boone. The grizzly stood no more than 15 yards from the cabin, just beyond the tree line. His thick body was half hidden by low-hanging fog, but his presence was unmistakable. He didn't move, didn't snarl or grunt, just watched. Harper stepped to the window slowly, her hand on the sill, unsure whether to speak. But Boone didn't need words. He remained there for nearly a minute, then turned and padded back into the woods. Micah whistled under his breath. That's not normal. It is now, Caleb replied. Later that evening, after Micah had left to install a test beacon near the creek, Harper and Caleb sat on the porch steps with wool blankets draped over their shoulders. The forest was alive with the sound of dripping branches and owl calls. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of Boone's movement rustled softly through brush. Harper glanced sideways. You lost someone here, didn't you? She asked gently. Caleb didn't respond right away. The glow from the cabin window caught the edges of his face, casting long shadows beneath his eyes. My son, he said at last. Name was Owen. He was 23, wilderness biology grad, thought he knew how to read snowpack better than anyone. He was wrong. Harper's throat tightened. I'm sorry. He died out past Devil's Ridge. Avalanche hit. Took rescue 2 days to find his body. Caleb exhaled through his nose. That winter. I quit for 6 months, then I came back. Couldn't let the forest take one more thing without me watching it. They sat in silence, the same kind Boone had offered earlier, not emptiness, but presence. Now you're here, Caleb added quietly. You saw what I saw, felt what I felt. Don't waste that. Harper nodded slowly. I won't. Spring had deepened in Glacier National Park, trading the last of its snowdrifts for wildflowers that bloomed like whispered promises across the valley floor. The sky, a clear, cloudless stretch of blue, reflected in the calm waters of Wren Lake, a glacial lake tucked between the ridges where the pine forests bowed in quiet reverence. It had been nearly 5 weeks since Harper Lane first stepped into the frigid river to save Boone's cub, and in that time, the forest had begun to remember how to breathe. The alert system Harper had designed with Micah and Caleb now stood in silent sentry around flood-prone banks and steep ravines. Motion-triggered reflectors spun softly in the breeze, catching the eyes of curious deer before they wandered too far. High-frequency pulses, imperceptible to human ears, guided predators gently away from danger zones. Even the ravens, who usually ignored everything but carrion and mischief, had begun nesting farther from the floodplain. Harper moved through the woods with ease now, a handheld scanner in one gloved hand, logging beacon battery levels and atmospheric data. She had stopped keeping track of the days, her routines shaped more by the rhythm of the forest than the ticking of clocks. Her posture had changed too, less guarded, more rooted, though still young. She no longer carried herself like someone with something to prove. That morning, she wore her usual faded canvas jacket and hiking pants, knees stained green from kneeling among moss and stone. A scarf Caleb had given her, blue plaid, worn soft from years, was wrapped around her neck. She knelt beside beacon number 17 near the west end of Wren Lake, adjusting its solar panel slightly to catch more morning light. The forest was so quiet. She heard the ripple before she saw it. From the opposite side of the lake, the water stirred in gentle rings. Boone emerged slowly from the shadows between the trees, his heavy paws barely making a sound against the soft loam. His coat had grown sleek again, healthier than when she first saw him. Following 3 paces behind was the cub, no longer a shivering scrap of fur, but a small, sturdy version of its father, with wide, curious eyes and a slightly crooked step that hinted at the trauma it had survived. Harper stood, heart steady but full. She didn't move forward. She knew better. Boone approached without hesitation. Between his jaws hung a freshly caught salmon, silver scales still glinting, blood trailing from its gills like ribbons. He stopped 6 feet from her, locked eyes, and gently dropped the fish onto the earth. Then he stepped back. The cub sniffed the air but didn't flinch. It didn't hide, it simply waited. Harper stared at the gift, unsure what to say, or if she even should. Her throat tightened. Caleb's voice broke the silence from behind. "You just got paid in salmon. That's a promotion if I've ever seen one." She turned to find him leaning against a cedar tree, arms crossed, a rare, wide smile lifting his weathered face. It was the first time Harper had seen him grin like that, genuine, without grief hiding behind his eyes. "I thought you were surveying at Silver Trail today," she said. "I was," he replied, stepping closer, but Micah radioed, said Beacon 17 might be getting interference. "I figured you could use some backup. Looks like you've got better company." Harper looked back at Boone and the cub. They hadn't left. "Why do you think he did it?" she asked softly. "Because you saved his world," Caleb said, "and animals remember that, even if we forget." They stood side by side as Boone eventually turned, nudged the cub along with his snout, and disappeared once again into the green. Harper bent slowly, picked up the salmon with both hands, and set it into a nearby stream pool, watching it drift gently into the shallows. Later that afternoon, back at the cabin, she packed her things in silence, not to leave, but to move in permanently. The small guest room Micah had been fixing up now bore her name on the door. Her contract had been extended, and she had signed without hesitation. Micah ever reclusive, only nodded when she told him. "You're part of the place now," he said. "It'd be weird without you yelling at my wiring at dusk." Harper stood on the porch alone, hands in her jacket pockets, watching two hawks circle above the tree line. The lake reflected the purple burn of sunset, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled once, low, long, and without sorrow. Caleb joined her quietly. "Didn't think I'd say this," he murmured. "But the forest feels different now. It feels alive." She replied, "Maybe it always was." He said, "We just weren't listening, sometimes. The miracles we seek do not come with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive on quiet mornings, in the form of a bear's gentle bow, a cub's survival, or a salmon laid softly at our feet. In those moments, we're reminded that even in the wildest corners of the earth, grace exists, and perhaps God speaks through the creatures we too often overlook. This story is not just about survival, it's about second chances, about listening to the silent language of nature, and about believing that even the hardest hearts, animal or human, can remember love when it is freely given. Maybe you're facing something difficult right now. Maybe you're waiting for your own boon, your own sign that you're not alone in the fight. Let this be a reminder, sometimes. The quiet answer you've been praying for is already watching from the edge of the trees. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Comment below what this moment meant to you. And if you believe in miracles, type Amen in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and help us keep telling stories that reveal the soul of the world, one creature, one act of love, and one prayer at a time. May God bless you and everyone who walks beside you.